Hello and welcome back to CBR MTG. My name is Angus Mackay and today we're going to be doing another Highlander deck tech. I'm here with Philip Nicholson. Hi Philip.
Hi.
And today we're talking about Tribal Warriors, or as Phil affectionately likes to call it, Cowards Can't Block. So Phil, why don't you, to start us off, obviously, what is Warriors, how does it play, and what are some of the sort of key cards that makes it a good deck?
Yeah, so Warriors is just an aggro deck, so something like Zoo. About as aggressive as a deck really can get. Kind of the main crux is Neela the Blade Blossom, which is an offering from Battle Bond that makes warrior tokens whenever warriors attack, which gets out of hand real fast. But there's definitely a few other cards that really promote a warrior tribal synergy that keep the deck working together quite nicely.
Sure. So, Battle Bond being basically a huge pull into Warriors, giving you a bunch of cards like Nigella the Blade Blossom, as you mentioned before, and Decorated Champion. But the really interesting one was the Rushblade Commander, which gives all your Warriors haste, or more specifically, Warriors on your team haste.
There's some really interesting wording on all the Battle Bond cards from... because of the fact that it was two-headed giant set. Mm-hmm. For example, if you want to, you can give your opponents warrior tokens if they attack you with a warrior with Neela, which my dream is to do this so that I can block with a creature equipped with Jitte. It hasn't happened, but I would like it to. But yeah, Rushblade Commander giving almost your entire deck haste, because almost everything is a warrior, is just insane. Haste is a really, really busted mechanic, and when your entire board has it, your opponent usually has a pretty bad time.
Yeah, it makes your top decks like strictly better because you have that surprise factor. Your opponent doesn't know what's on the top of your deck.
Definitely.
So in your deck, you can kind of sort of keep it akin to maybe like a Naya Zoo sort of list. You see a lot of cards like Reckless Bushwhacker and Namam Rynegade, Goblin Rabblemaster and Grim Lavamancer. Like these are just like good aggressive creatures that you can find in a lot of other sort of competitive formats, but then it kind of takes a weird turn after that. You've got a lot of Fate Reforged, Khans of Takir, and Dragons of Takir, because they also had a warrior synergy.
Yeah, so the Mardu clan had a bit of a warrior sub-theme going on. It wasn't super deep, but there were kind of just enough cards, and they were really good for the most part. Like Chief of the Scale being a 3/2 for white-black, that's already pretty decent, and gives all of your other warriors +1/+0, which is really, really nice. And one that's probably specifically worth calling out, because it's kind of easy to undervalue on a first read, Bludgeon Rager. Another cons, just a 2-drop for a 2/2, but when it attacks, all of your warriors, including Bludgeon Rager, gain Menace.
Which is super relevant when you're trying to get aggressive.
Anytime your opponent's just trying to lay down like Siege Rhinos, Kitchen Finks, any like big blocking creature, Bludgeon Rager just ruins that equation for them.
And you have a lot of Revolt creatures coming out of Kaladesh and Aether Revolt as well, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, I think that almost all the Revolt creatures, possibly all of them, were warriors. I think it was like a little lore thing that they wanted tucked into the block. But Revolt was also a really insane mechanic. So
stuff like Namam Rynegade, as we mentioned before, which has Death Touch as a 1/2 for 1, which isn't very exciting. But if you did get Revolt, such as cracking a fetch land, for anyone who doesn't know, Revolt is when a permanent you control left the battlefield. So easily triggered by fetches, but also just your creatures dying in combat. You can play it post in your second main phase. But with Namam Rynegade, it gets a +1/+1 counter on it. And then suddenly it's like a 2/3 for 1 with Death Touch.
Yeah, so the deck is playing, I believe, 3 Revolt creatures in total. Namam Rynegade, Greenwheel Liberator, which is a 2/1 with Revolt to get 2 +1/+1 counters on it. It's kind of the 2-drop version. Renegade Rallier, which is maybe a card people are familiar with from mid-range decks. It revolts to bring back any permanent that costs 2 or less. So that's one where any permanent triggering revolt is really important, because it's pretty regular with this deck that you'll like attack in with your 2-drop, you'll trade creatures, and you'll play post-combat Renegade Rallier and get your creature back, which is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Giving you sort of pseudo card advantage, when aggro decks find it very hard to do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Also, some sort of some cheeky warriors. One of my favorite parts about this deck, and I like it very much because you find out what is a warrior and what's not a warrior when you look at this list.
Yeah, so playing this deck, especially if you're like me and you prefer your cards to not be in English, you'll get a lot of people with very surprised reactions saying that they don't believe certain cards are warriors. I think Wild and the Cattle is probably number one at the top of that list. That card, for anyone who doesn't know, is in fact a cat warrior.
It's very good. Also, Arncrop Crasher and Earthshaker Kenra from Amonkhet Standard, both warriors. Goblin Cratermaker, which is a new addition, is a goblin warrior as well.
Yep.
You find all these like interesting synergies. But yeah, the Wild and the Cattle and the Vampire Lacerator, these sort of things where you just see them in aggro decks, don't realize that they're warriors.
Yeah, turns out that they actually are, which is really nice.
Yeah, it works out quite well for you. So this is 7-point Highlander, and of course we have a point structure. How are your points set out, and why did you choose them?
So the current version of the deck that I'm playing, or have been playing, is Mox Jet, Mox Ruby, and Zealous Jedi. So Jet and Ruby, it's basically just those are the most important colors in the deck. It's kind of a weird zoo deck in that green is actually the lightest color, which is definitely not the norm, but it just happens to be how the creatures in this deck turned out. So it's Jet, Ruby, Jedi. You don't really want to be playing cards like Strip Mine and Wasteland because they cost so few of your creatures. Other things like a Stoneforge Skull Clamp package doesn't really fit out into 7 points properly.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the deck is playing at the moment is playing a density of burn it would need to really justify Skull Clamp as an aggro deck. There was originally a version where I was playing a single blue dual land you could fetch for and spending 3 points on Time Walk.
Okay.
I think it was a little less consistent than just playing 2 Moxen.
Yeah, you definitely...
It was definitely very powerful when it worked. I think the biggest downside was having to play the blue land.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, notably a 4-color mana base, which is it's pretty. It can be pretty greedy, but we have a lot of rainbow lands to help support it. But with these aggro strategies, you're kind of locked into a specific couple of different sets of points. Like, because Moxen are so expensive, they're actually usually just your best aggro points that you can have. With you choosing to use 6 points on Moxen. But as you mentioned before, Time Walk being a very good either tempo or aggro card purely to get another attack step. But it seems like Umezawa's Jitte and possibly Skull Clamp being the sort of the main pieces. But because it's actually Skull Clamp is also not that great in your deck specifically because you have buffs and your creatures are like bigger than they should be allowed to be, so not a whole lot of them are X1s as well.
Yeah, I think other than Bloodsoaked Champion, there's nothing that I'm really excited to clamp. There's some other cards that happen to have 1 toughness and you can clamp them. And if you happen to go out of control with a Rebel Master and a Healer, you can start clamping your tokens, but you could also probably just attack your opponent's death.
Yeah.
That's despite what some blue mages may tell you, killing your opponent is better than drawing cards.
I refuse to believe it. You also have a little bit of interaction in your deck. All good aggro decks in very competitive formats have at least some sort of interaction. Notably, you have the set of Thalias. So Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, making your opponent's everyone's non-creature spells 1 more to cast. And Thalia, Heretic Cathar, kind of being somewhat of a tempo play. Both notably not warriors, but I think they're kind of just good enough to make the cut. As well as Abrupt Decay for a nice catch-all, Fatal Push for another little bit of removal, and then you have some more like aggro synergies with Ataka's Command and Collected Company as well. And a little bit of burn here and there with Lightning Bolt, Helix, and Chain Lightning, which I think... was there any other warriors that you'd choose over these spells just to make your Thalia as high-powered as it possibly could be?
Yeah, I mean, there's some other warriors that are pretty decent. So off the top of my head, Countryside Crusher is okay, Goblin Bushwhacker is okay. I'm not playing Mindblade Render, which is pretty decent. There's a couple of non-warriors like Tajik, the new Tajik that you can play, which are decent. I can't think of any other warriors off the top of my head that are worth playing.
But you chose this sort of package.
There's still a couple there.
Yep. And then you chose this package of non-creature spells because they're the best of the best, or
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
The chance of bricking on Collector Company at all is just phenomenally low. You're playing almost 30 creatures, all of which cost 3 or less. Abrupt Decay is obviously fantastic. It's possible it should be an Assassin's Trophy in a post Guilds of Ravnica world.
okay,
I just haven't really looked at the deck list much since
Sure.
the sets come out, so
requires a bit of testing as well.
yeah.
I'm sure.
Obviously, you don't want to be ramping your opponents, but the fact that it can get rid of really big things is super important. Just some solar removal, and then there's the fact that the Thalias as well as Grim Lavamancer and Mother of Runes are all the creatures in the main board that aren't warriors, but it is important that they are all humans, because those, as well as a pair of Hate Bears out of the sideboard, and a lot of the warriors in your deck are humans.
Okay.
Which means that with cards like Cavern of Souls, if you have to, you can name human instead of warrior. You'd obviously rather name warrior, but if you need Thalia to be uncounterable, you can name human, and it's okay.
Yeah, I mean that's a good layover with quite a lot of your cards being humans as well. That's interesting that you did choose these specific cards with, as you said before, Lavamancer, Mother of Ruins, the 2 Thalias, and I believe that's it. The cards that are not warriors, are these just the best of the non-warriors that you want to have included in your deck?
Yeah, I mean, you can count Smuggler's Copter as well.
Sure.
Although, warriors are just as good as piloting the Copter as anyone else. But, yeah, they are pretty much just really, really good creatures that you probably should be playing, even though they're not warriors. They're just powerful enough. Heretic Cathar is a little bit looser than the rest in a lot of ways, but I think that the deck just wants to have access to an aggressive creature that causes incidental hate to most enemy strategies main board, because you're playing such a high density of creatures, you're not playing cards like Thoughtseize main board to interact with combo. So anything that can buy you a turn or even 2 against a combo deck is really important to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you can fit it in.
You just need like 1 or 2 turns for your opponent to sort of slip up or like struggle a little bit to draw the cards that they need, and those 2 Thalias really help with that strategy.
Yeah, so the deck is typically killing your opponent around turn 4, sometimes turn 5, sometimes turn 3. Technically possible to kill on turn 2, but it's
You got to be good.
It's pretty ludicrous. But if you can get it to turn 4, means that against combo decks, if you can make them wait a turn because of a Thalia or something like that, it's not too difficult to get there. It's not a great matchup, but you can definitely get there.
You can definitely make it.
I think the only other real card we haven't discussed about in the main board would be the Obsidian Battle Axe. Although it is technically a warrior, so in a way we have talked about it. But it is an equipment from, I believe it's Morningtide, which gives equipped creature +2/+1 and has haste. Whenever a warrior comes into play, you can attach Obsidian Battle Axe to it and has equipped with 3.
Yeah, so usually a 3-mana equipment with equip 3 is usually unplayable in pretty competitive formats. But this upside plus the warrior subclause is pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's more like a fervor, but it also gives any 1 creature at a time +2/+1.
Yeah.
I have also had a couple of situations where I have just paid the mana to equip it to something like a Mother of Runes so that she can immediately protect herself.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Like, you can pay 3 to equip it if you have to. It's obviously not where you want to be most of the time, but sometimes it does just happen.
Also, it's incredibly on theme. Which I think is very important.
It is a warrior as a card from Morningtide. It's a tribal artifact warrior equipment. It's also just really, really good.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's totally fine.
And we you can catch on our YouTube channel, and I'll make sure that I link it in the description. But Phil is the progenitor of the Legacy Warriors list that we took to a very impressive 3 to maybe 2-3 finish.
I mean, I
in Legacy.
think for a first draft of a Legacy deck, that's not too bad.
Yeah, I thought it was very funny, but I remember you saying, if there's no Obsidian Battle Axe in it, I'm leaving.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely, as a 3-mana equipment, it can be pretty easy to undervalue.
Yep.
But, after you play a few games with it, it's pretty easy to recognize just making every creature draw off the top of your deck that live. I mean, even just turning like a 1-drop 2/1 into a 4/3, or 4/2 rather,
with haste is so relevant.
It's very good.
100%.
The only downside of Obsidian Battle Axe is, unfortunately, it's not uncounterable off Cavern of Souls, because Cavern of Souls only works on creatures. But
I mean, you could definitely tap it, look at your opponent in the eyes, and then cast Obsidian Battle Axe and see what they say.
Yeah, that's true.
Warrior equipment.
Yeah, I mean.
But you wouldn't, because we're all fun players here. We all like to have a good time. How do you feel? So, Highlander is a very sort of specific format. In the recent Highlander Championship, we had 5 out of the 8 top 8 was control decks. How do you feel like aggro is positioned in Highlander in the current meta, and maybe like aggro in general? How do you feel it's positioned?
Sure. So in that event that you're talking about, there was actually a 4-color aggro deck, which is the same 4 colors. It wasn't built around a warrior synergy, but it was definitely an aggro deck.
Okay.
I think that aggro is okay. I don't think it's great, and I don't think it's unplayable either. I think that it's just a little difficult for 1-mana 2/2s and 2/3s and things like that to compete with the raw power of the Colligan's commands and the treasure cruisers and all the things like that. I think that it can be really rough for a zoo or an aggro player to try and beat through the card advantage and cost effectiveness these days of cards in control and mid-range decks.
Yeah, absolutely. When your opponent's 2-for-1ing you and you don't have, like, you've got a little bit of like pseudo card advantage in the Smuggler's Copter, the Collector Company. We mentioned before with the Bloodsoaked Champion being a very bad version of any sort of like advantage, but you want to be concentrating on killing your opponent, and when you're putting more cards in because they draw you cards or they do something like they help you in the long game, you're actually doing yourself a disservice because you kind of want to be all in,
Yeah, I mean, it's why I'm not playing Mindblade Render, is because despite the fact that, if your opponent doesn't have blockers and you get your Warriors 3, you draw a bunch of cards, but if your opponent doesn't have blockers and you're getting Warriors 3, you'd rather just have a 2-drop with 4 power and kill them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's interesting. Another thing that's pretty cute with this, and something that we've seen a few times in Highlander, is trying to do tribal synergies, which I think is really interesting. And also the fact that you've had to build a mana base that supports singleton tribal, this one being 4-color opting for without blue. But we've seen before 5-color humans, which has made a splash in Highlander recently. We've also got goblins and merfolk giving it their very best. Definitely not in 5 colors, but the singleton nature of Highlander can make it difficult. How did you look for good playable cards, and how did you evaluate them, considering you probably had to do some kind of searching to fill out your deck with good warriors?
So I guess the first step was that I received a copy of Neela the Blade Blossom and thought to myself, is this going to be playable in Highlander? And I used some search engine. It might have been Gatherer. It could have been anything, really. And I searched for every card in Magic with the subtype Warrior, and I wrote down all the ones I thought were even borderline playable. And I got to the end of this and realized I had a list of about 40-50 creatures, which is pretty impressive for borderline playable, really. That's more than I expected. And then I looked at the list again, and I'm like, there's probably 10, maybe more here, that are just cards I see in Zoo. So, cards like Wild Nicatl,
Spike Jester,
Canra, Spike Jester. I'm like, these are all cards I have seen people play and are just not terrible cards by any stretch of the imagination. So I think
sort of let yourself run from there.
Yeah, and then I just kind of trimmed a lot of the cards that cost a bit too much mana and maybe just weren't quite as good. I ended up with this.
Okay. Building a 5-color mana base as well can be very difficult. I notice. I mean, you are playing 4 rainbow lands with the Unclaimed Territory, the Cavern of Souls, and the City of Brass mana confluence as well. But then you're just decked out on duels, a few fetches, and then a couple of and then 1 basic land I see as well, and then a Horizon Canopy, which is very good to include. How did you work around this mana base? The fetch lands that you chose and the dual lands that you chose, and basically just the way that you constructed this mana base.
The dual lands, you're playing every dual land that doesn't tap for blue. Fetch lands is the same. You're playing all, 6 that aren't blue, would be correct.
Yeah.
But then you're also playing an additional Flooded Strand, just because you want another fetch land, even if it is kind of off color. Flooded Strand is the blue dual of choice, simply because it finds the basic in the deck.
Yep.
If you're less concerned about Blood Moon in your local meta, you can run Polluted Delta or Scalding Tarn instead, because red and black are more important colors to have outside of Blood Moon being a concern. The other things are Cavern of Souls and Unclaimed Territory are pretty easy includes. They cast almost everything in the deck. There's not too many demanding mana costs outside of the creatures themselves, and then City of Brass and Mana Confluence for similar reasons. There is also a shock land in Sacred Foundry, which is a red shock land that we can find with our blue fetch land. So if you swap Flooded Strand for Polluted Delta, swap Sacred Foundry for Blood Crypt.
These are pretty niche lines and deck building decisions, but I mean, it all makes sense in theory. Like your two copy up duels, Plateau and Sacred Foundry, and you took the time to think about which blue fetch land that you did want to include. What would be the most beneficial decision? What are you prioritizing with your sort of fetch lands, and how do you work out which lands you should be fetching first? Because it can be very difficult as well in a singleton format.
A lot of the time, what you're fetching is just going to be dependent on what's in your hand and things like that. But assuming you either don't have enough direction in your hand because your color costs are pretty lenient, or you're just not really sure exactly what the best combination is. Assuming you have 2 fetches, so you're finding any 2 duels that you want, basically. You want to find Bayou and Plateau, because that casts the most 2-drops possible from 2 lands. You can't cast Honored Crop Captain or Abrupt Decay off those, but unfortunately off 2 duels, that's the best you're going to get. So the ideal is to have kind of a third land, or to just have your cards line up in a sequence where you're, if there's a card or 2 you can't cast, then you don't fetch such that happens.
Yeah.
So basically the thing to keep in mind, because you're in 4 colors and you want to have access to all 4 colors at any one time, if you ever find a dual land, say the green-white dual land, you won't be able to cast. It'll be very difficult to cast a card that costs both green and white. The flip side of that is also that if you're finding the green-white dual land, you're going to be finding the black-red dual land.
Yeah.
So it'll be very difficult to cast a card that costs black and red.
Okay.
Because you want to have both halves of the 4-color whole, essentially.
Of course.
And it is very important to be able to cast cards that are both black and red. That is the most important combination.
Okay, that makes sense. With budget can be a consideration with a lot of people, and everyone's obviously keeping an eye on how much this costs. It's $6,000 in the paper world. 150 ticks online if you ever wanted to try it out on Modo.
Yeah, well,
if you can ever find someone to play with you.
You're lucky on Modo because Moxen don't cost very much there.
Yeah.
That is the vast majority of the cost of the deck. A lot of the creatures are garbage commons and uncommons.
Yeah.
And can be found for, in the realm of 20 cents.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. If you have a good, you got to have a good community, which a lot of cities, and I would dare say all cities, are very, very forgiving and very happy to help whenever you need it. But realistically, if you had the dual lands that you needed, or had a connection with someone with the dual lands, and then you kind of need to get those Moxen, I think that's very important to put in your deck. The rest is merely the most expensive card out of that is outside of your mana base is Jit, and that's a $20 card, and the rest of it's pretty cheap. So
Yeah, I mean, unless you wanna fork out and start foiling things, then you're pretty set. Outside of the mana base, which is, as you mentioned, pretty expensive.
yeah, and I think you'll find that as well. The benefit of playing an expensive mana base, I guess, is that it opens you up to many other decks in Highlander.
Yeah, I mean, if you decide after playing this that you want to actually play Naya Zoo, you're most of the way there.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, dual lands are always a good investment anyway because they go in a lot of different decks.
Yeah.
Going into the sideboard, why don't you run us through the cards that you've chosen and what you'd bring them in against, and maybe talk about some of the synergies that you have with some of the sneaky warriors in this list.
Sure. So the first two I'll talk about are the two non-warrior hate bears that I mentioned, which are Aethersworn Canonist and Containment Priest, both of which are human, I believe both of which are clerics. So they're just there to help with various combo matchups, whether it be something like Reanimator or something like Storm. You just want something that can attack, but also helps you with the angle that your opponent is going for. So either Sworn Canonist not letting them cast multiple spells, or Containment Priest making creatures come into play the old-fashioned way is really good for that.
Absolutely.
Then there's a bit of a package of warriors. So you're playing Manic Vandal for your shops matchups, which is a warrior. You're playing Zozu the Punisher for your lands matchups, which makes every land deal 2 to its controller when it comes into play.
Possibly a consideration for
control.
For control as
yeah,
well.
You can definitely bring it against control as well. And then the final one is Kalidas, Trader of Get.
A warrior.
Yeah, both Kalidas are warriors, but we're going to play the good one. So this one is just for things like Red-Black Burn, so where you want a body with lifelink, you want your opponent's creatures not being recurred. It just does a lot of good things there. Other aggro decks it can be pretty good against.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then after that, we've got our Get Rid of Blood Moon package in Fragmentize and Seal of Cleansing. You've got Thoughtseize and Inquisition to help out against combo decks, just a bit of hand disruption. Tormod's Crypt, which is another hate card for Reanimator.
Sure.
You've got Collin's Command, which is decent if you feel like you need to go for a long game or you just want to blow up artifacts. So it's really good against any kind of equipment creature deck.
Yep.
Blowing up a Skull Clamp and a creature, or hitting a Stoneforge Mystic and a Batterskull. Really, really good.
Also, Modal's really good in Highlander because you can pick and choose whichever you want.
Definitely.
But Colligan's Command also kind of being in control as well. I mean, you can recur one of your dead creatures and make them discard a card or shock. There's lots of different combinations.
Bringing back a Anila or a Rushblade Commander against control. If you'd probably want your opponent to be on a control deck where they had artifacts you could target.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think that you don't want to reduce your creature density too much against that kind of deck.
Okay.
But I think that there's definitely a world in which that's not terrible. So the cards that you've mainly got for control are Sylvan Library, Domri Raid, and Sealy Resolve.
Domri Raid, it's some would call it a meme card, but it's very good when you have such a high density of creatures because you want to be able to hit every single time. But it's card advantage, right?
Yeah, I mean, when your deck is pretty close to 50% creatures, it is going to draw you a card roughly every second turn. That's pretty decent. I think that another card I've also tried in this slot was Patriarch's Bidding, which each player gets to name a creature type, and then all players return all creatures of all named types to the battlefield.
It sounds like a commander card if I ever heard one.
It definitely is. That's why I own one. But it does unfortunately cost 5, but it does say against any kind of grinding game where your opponent's been 1-for-1ing removaling all your creatures. If you can resolve Patriarch's Bidding, then you probably just win the game.
Sure.
The other kind of tribal card that I've thrown in there, which is another bit of a commander card, is Sealy Resolve.
Yep.
Which is a 2-cost enchantment. As it comes into play, name creature type, and creatures of the chosen type have Shroud.
Yeah, super good.
Yeah. And then I think the only card I haven't mentioned yet is Zealous Persecution, which is just a card for, aggro matchups.
Yeah, I mean, it kills souls, kills Truna Nemesis, which is one of the most played points.
Yeah, it kills Young Pyromancer and all his friends. It kills a lot of things. It also just makes you win combat if your opponent's blocking or you're blocking. It does a lot of good things.
It has a lot of modes. I like the making your opponent's combat step lose the game.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because if they're making very specific blocks, you end up just blowing them out completely. All their creatures die and you get them for enough damage to win.
Yeah.
One of my favorite cards. I think I like it a lot.
It's pretty solid.
Yeah. So that's all we had for Warriors. We will put a link in the description. And if you want to, you can find us on Discord. We'll put that link in the description as well. The 7 Point Highlander Discord is very prominent. And where can people reach out and find you if they want to ask more questions about Warriors?
I try to make myself as contactable as possible on as many things as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Twitter, Discord, and Facebook are all pretty solid.
Great. And we'll put those links in the description as well. My name is Angus Mackay. This has been Philip Nicholson. And we will see you next time.
Bye.